So now we've had episodes containing each of the 3 Streets of Rage games for the Mega Drive, so here's an Omnibus episode of Streets of Rage 1, 2 and 3 on the Mega Drive. Enjoy. The Mega Drive was in desperate need of a good side-scrolling beat-em-up. In 1989, Golden Axe was released to rave reviews, but the fans demanded more. In 1990, Double Dragon appeared on the system, but in 1991, Sega developed and published Streets of Rage on the Sega Megadrive. How does it stand up 30 years later? In this episode, let's find out. The game hit European shelves in October 1991 and was an instant success. It's simple, no-nonsense action and controls made it easy to pick up and start fighting. First the plot. The city had been taken over by a criminal syndicate, headed up by the evil Mr. X. The city is overrun and no one is safe. Adam Hunter, Axel Stone and Blaze Fielding are veteran ex-police officers who have left the force to fight back. So that's the plot. Well, what's the game like? Well, it's a 2-player simultaneous scrolling beat-em-up. You choose one of the 3 ex-police officers and go and kick some ass. The controls are easy. C jumps, B attacks, and A calls on your police officer friends to help clear the screen. You can perform combo attacks by repeatedly hitting your enemies. You can get hold of them and pound them into the ground if you're close enough. The game is spread out over 8 stages: City Street, the Inner City, the beachfront, on the bridge, aboard a ship, the factory, the freight elevator, and finally at the Syndicate headquarters. As you've heard from them little clips, they all have their own soundtracks and they're all memorable and add fantastic depth to the game. Each level has end-of-level baddies. Unlike most games of this genre, they are not named and just appear as boss in the top panel. The manual does give them names, and they are named in the game's sequels. The baddies are cartoonishly bigger than your hero, and some are more difficult than others, but I do wonder if the Ultimate Warrior ever knew about this likeness that appeared in the game. At the end of level 8, you get the choice of joining Mr. X. If you say yes, and are in a 1-player game, you are thrown back a couple of stages and eventually take over the crime syndicate yourself. However, if you're a moral, upstanding citizen that has just beaten up hundreds of baddies, you can eventually take down Mr. X and bring peace to the city. If you're in a 2-player game and one joins and one doesn't, you end up fighting each other to the death to see who rules supreme. The enemies that you face come in groups. They all have different attacks, some are the same enemy but coloured differently, offering different attacks. As per the norm for these games of the time, there's a lady dressed quite sexily with a whip. Not that the teenage me was complaining at the time. Later stages see the return of previous bosses as mid-boss characters, and if they weren't hard enough to beat the first time round, they definitely get harder the second. The game starts you with 3 lives and 3 continues, so it's not super difficult to complete. If you add in a 2-player mode, it is a fun little game that will keep you going back to beat it. And whether you save the city, or run it yourself, basically whatever floats your boat. The game has been re-released many times as part of many compilation packs. The original was ported to the Game Gear in 1992 and then the Master System in 1993. There were 2 sequels released on the Mega Drive, and Streets of Rage 4 has just been released in 2020 on the new generations of computers. There was a gap of 26 years between games. The games through the Mega Drive history did improve through the franchise and they will be covered a little bit later on. However, as the genesis of the franchise, this game stands out in the early Mega Drive catalogue and it still holds its own today. Thanks for watching this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Noob Game Reviews. A couple of weeks ago we looked at Streets of Rage on the Mega Drive, or the Genesis for our American cousins. I literally had some people ask if I will be looking at the other instalments to the game. So don't say I don't listen to you all, so here is NGR's review of Streets of Rage 2 on the Megadrive. The game was released in 1992, and due to the success of the first installment, it was almost guaranteed to be successful. But in order to make this game bigger and better, the developers at Sega had to develop a new way to produce the game cartridges in order to fit everything in. The game was created by the same team that produced Streets of Rage 1, and it follows on from this game. It's set a year after the original, and basically Mr. X is back. And this time, he's kidnapped Adam, and it's your job to save him. This time you can control 4 characters. There's Max, who's a wrestler, there's Axel and Blaze from the first game, and Adam's little brother Skate. As in the first game, they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Max is strong but slow, and Skate is fast but weak. As before, it's a side-scrolling 1 or 2 player beat-em-up. You've got the usual kick, throw and jump attacks, but instead of the police car from the first game as your special move, you've now got 2 super combo moves you can use. And just to put a disclaimer out, these are definitely not inspired by a certain Street Fighter 2 game that was released a year earlier. You can use these as many times as you want, but make contact with your enemy. As well as taking them down, you also lose a bit of your own energy, so use wisely. As usual, you've got hordes of enemies to defeat, and yes, fans of ladies dressed in leather with whips, these girls are back too. The levels are spread out over 8 stages. Stage 1 sees you battle in the streets and through bars. Stage 2 on a bridge and through a truck. Stage 3 in a fun fair, and various scenes that pop up in there. I do think they had some sprites left over from an abandoned Alien game to use up, so they shoved them in here. Stage 4 in a baseball field. I do love the do baseball signs, and in this stage definitely not the Ultimate Warrior from the first game again makes an appearance. Stage 5's on a ship. And this takes you all the way to stage 6, which is a jungle path. Stage 7 sees you battle through the base, and stage 8 is battling against the bosses again to fight Mr. X. There is the usual array of beat-em-up cliches. There's lifts, there's vehicles, weapons and power-up. And I'm not sure about you, but I don't think I would eat a whole roast chicken that I find on the street. Well, not sober anyway. I do like the nice little touches. As you'll notice in this level, there are arcade machines to beat up. They are named Bare Knuckle, and this was the name of Streets of Rage in Japan. This was the first game in the series to have names of the people you were battling so you could see who you're beating up. Unlike the first game, there's only one ending, so you don't get the choice to join Mr. X. So once you are beaten into submission, hopefully for good this time, you rescue Adam and then you're choppered out to safety. And I'm sure that's the last time we'll see Mr. X. Maybe. The game boasts some terrific music and is probably the best of any of the Rage series of games. It's based around electro dance music. It is often featured on compilation CDs of the best computer game music. Streets of Rage 2 was ported onto the Game Gear and the Master System. They try hard to give a good representation of the original, and to be honest, they don't do a bad job. But if I was pushed, I would have to say the Game Gear version is the better of the two. The Master System version seems to make your character feel like they're moving on ice. You only get the choice of 3 characters in these games, poor Max is left out, but they do the job as expected for an 8-bit system. The game has been re-released a number of times over the years, with versions on the Dreamcast and Xbox for example. But this version remains a firm favourite to the Streets of Rage fanbase. The game is bright, colourful, sounds amazing, and it still holds up today. I always did enjoy a little blast of this game. Like I said, I will be completing the trilogy of Mega Drive Streets of Rage games with a 3rd instalment soon. But for now, thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Noob Game Reviews. As we've covered the first 2 Streets of Rage games a few weeks ago, it's only natural to complete the trilogy with today's review. So, here we go with Noob's game review of Streets of Rage 3 on the Sega Megadrive. The original game was praised for its unique style, gameplay and soundtrack. The second took everything the first did and added so much more. The third game? Well, let's just find out. Released worldwide in June 1994, the third installment of the franchise sees Mr. X start a research company to act as cover for his illegal activities. The robotic expert Dr. Zan discovers what the research company is all about and alerts Blaze to the evil plans. Blaze contacts Axel and Skate, and they both come and help, and it's into the streets to do battle. Again, you choose from the 4 characters: Blaze, Axel and Skate from the previous game, and Zan, who is new, replaces Max. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses, so it's down to the player's preference which one they use. All the characters have the usual mix of attacks. Zan can use weapons as fireballs this time around. This time they all have running attacks to help smash the baddies. And then it's business as usual. The heroes battle through various stages and face an ender level boss until the eventual battle at the end of stage... well... it depends what stage number you're thinking about, you see, because this game introduced the plot twist of multiple endings. There are 4 endings altogether depending on how you perform throughout the game. The game ends at stage 5 if you're playing on the easy level, with this ending telling you you're basically wimped out by playing in easy. There are then a further 2 stages if you progress, and these have different endings as well depending on what you do within these levels. This adds some good longevity to the game, as to fully complete it you need to play through and complete the different challenges to see absolutely everything the game's got to offer. The game has got cutscenes, and this moves the narrative on and tells a good story. There are also regional variances with characters and plot lines differing between the Western and the Japanese versions. Ash, who was a character in the Japanese version, is a gay stereotype character. He was removed from the English versions alongside various bits of clothing and plot twists of other characters. But fans of vixens with whips and leather, don't you worry, they're back in the game as well. Oh, and if you've ever wondered what it would be like to control a kangaroo battling against an evil syndicate, well then this is the game for you. Does the phrase jump the shark mean anything? And now here's the downside. You always knew this was coming. I just don't feel this moves on enough from Streets of Rage 2. The gap between the first and the second game is massive. The gap between the second and third games, not so much. It feels very much like it was released to satisfy the fans rather than being a labour of love the first 2 were. It's not horrific, and if it was a standalone title it would be fine, but it's definitely the weakest of the trilogy. Another thing to point out is the music is not as good as the second instalment, which itself is a massive letdown. There are different storylines for you to follow and different characters, but as a side-scrolling beat-em-up, it's fun, it's playable, but it's not an essential Megadrive title by any stretch of the imagination. The 4th game in the series was released in 2020, and this was 26 years after this one, which goes to show that they didn't think they needed to revive the format. Streets of Rage 3 has been released on various Sega compilations over the years, although it was missing from the recent Sega Megadrive Classic, and that speaks volumes. So there we have it, the complete reviews of the Streets of Rage trilogy. Do you agree with them? Even if you don't, let me know in the comments. I always like to hear what you've got to say. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up to date with any more reviews coming up. And thanks for watching New Game Reviews.